And I think that financial risk makes it super clear, you are self-employed, and even that mindset from a driver's perspective can help them understand, how that extends into having tax responsibilities, and even things like, raising invoices and being VAT registered are clear signs that someone is self-employed. If you're an employee, you're not VAT registered. And again, if I was a driver making a claim against the main contractor, and I was going small claims and I was VAT registered, raising my own invoices, and I'd been leasing a van and being deducted for it, I'd find it really difficult to say the words, I'm an employee. Because straight away you'd be like, well, didn't you register for VAT? And in what world as an employee do you raise invoices and claim VAT? And it's all these things that just build up a profile that make it super clear that, someone is self-employed and not employed.
In an instance where a substitute is used, where does the liability sit on checking a right to work and getting the substitute to sign a contract? Where does that sit?
It's a really interesting question because when we do our Home Office sort of follow up on Monday, this is part of the legislation that I think is going to take some time to sort of flush itself out in terms of where this extension of liability piece sits. But when you're having a substitute, if a substitute's used, then the original driver is responsible for providing a qualified substitute. Yeah. And one would argue that part of the qualification is the responsibility for the substitute being qualified is on the original driver. But this extension of liability now starts to beg the question, actually, should the original engager, because they're in the supply chain, also have visibility over those documents? And of course, that's where tools that we've built like Network View and things like that come into scope, because they add to that the ability to have that visibility.
So my biggest thing is, don't put anything in writing to drivers that can come back and bite you, right? So one thing is, a recent driver claim that we had was based on a message that went out from an OSM saying that deductions were going to start being made for parcel, misdelivery, etc., no exceptions, and putting it in writing. In that way, the driver ended up claiming that there was no notice for the deduction to be made. They didn't have time to accept and agree and negotiate, etc. So just really, I don't like the idea of putting anything beyond just, this is your availability, you're going to be providing services here, and just calling it a day. Because another thing is, on the GDPR level, we're getting a lot of subject access requests. So if your company gets a subject access request, that driver's entitled to anything business related. So if you're OSM sending something for your business number, those have to be sent back to the driver. And you might not want, you don't want the court to see or tribunal to see you telling the driver, you're going to have to accept these deductions no matter what, right? Or you need to get in here, you didn't provide notice, or you're going to be charged because you were late today, right? Those are things that are all applicable only to employee-worker relationships. So you just really want to be careful. Imagine you're being watched. Don't put anything in writing you wouldn't want brought up in front of authoritative figures that can fine you. I guess here I'll go into the 3 pillars of self-employment. So we have 3, as I just said. And the first is there's no mutuality of obligation within self-employed engagements, which means that the contractor is not obliged to accept services from you, and you're not obliged to provide the opportunity for services to them. The second is the right to substitution. So contractors are not required to give personal service. So they should be able to send someone in their stead, right, without any hindrance on them. Yeah. There is a caveat that if you do not find that they are qualified, you can reject them there. But that has to be a possibility for them. They need to be able to have that as an option. And even if you can just show a couple examples if it was to come to an HMRC investigation or inquiry, right? And you can say, no, we actually have instituted the right to substitution here and here. That is great to prove your case that you're actually carrying out genuine self-employed engagements. And then the last is that there should be no control, supervision, or direction over the manner in which the contractor completes their work. So they shouldn't be micromanaged. You can have service level expectations set by the end client. So you need to have a 98% delivery success rate. That's a service level expectation that if the contractor can't carry out, they can't meet the contractual standard. So that is different than saying to deliver a parcel, they need to make a left turn instead of a right. That's showing control. So that's an example. And that goes to terminology as well, because what we see a lot is we'll have our clients sometimes will reach out to a contractor and they can't come in, for example, and they say, you need to get in here now, or you didn't give notice, language like that. You want to avoid that, right? Because that implies an employee-worker relationship there, and that's something you don't want to do. So just knowing these three pillars, and if you have any more questions, always feel free to reach out.
So what we're talking about is the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Act of 2025, which went on the statute books last December. And there's two aspects of it really that affect our industry here in final mile, and that is the changes to bring self-employment into scope and extension of liability. So bringing self-employment into scope. So at the moment, while the Home Office strongly advise that you check the right to work of someone you engage with on a self-employed basis, there is a bit of a grey area there, not in the law in it. This legislation completely removes that grey area, and it brings what they call other working arrangements, in other words self-employed, into scope. So if you're engaging somebody on a self-employed basis, you absolutely need to check the right to work status with this new legislation. If you're engaging the person, you're responsible to check the right to work. It doesn't matter how you met that person, how you were introduced to that person. If you were introduced them by a matching platform, or if you introduced them by a recruitment agency, or it was referred a friend, that doesn't matter. You can't assume that somebody else has done the check. You can't assume that you know that they had worked somewhere previously, so you're going to assume that they had checked because they're a reputable company and they wouldn't engage with someone who didn't have it. None of that matters. You have to be able to prove that you did it.
The point there as well, which I think is again really, really valid, is that checking before the employment/engagement starts, right? So I think something that's become quite topical is doing a right to work check today for someone that provided services for you yesterday could potentially still be a fail, right, in the eyes of the Home Office or whoever it is that's auditing you, because it was clear, it's evidence that the check didn't happen before the engagement started, and I think that's a key part, right?
Yes, and the reality is that at the moment, a lot of people would check right to work just before the person starts. That is the last point, okay, so which will still be legal. But what we believe is going to happen is that process is going to move a lot earlier in the recruitment process, and that this is going to be the first question that anyone asks. So at the moment, you have to ask questions like, have you delivered a parcel before, or we ask questions about how you deal with a customer, etc., etc. All the things we're all well used to, and to see if the person be able to manage their day properly and manage their deliveries and all that. And then at the end of that, it might say, oh, and have you worked right to work in the UK? But we believe, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone here, we believe that question is going to move much, much earlier in the process, and it'll be the first question that's asked. Because if you don't, I'm sorry, this recruitment process is not going to continue anywhere, and you won't be joining. And I believe it'll be the first question that's asked when you start engaging somebody.
And I think the bit that's probably surprised us, and the reason why we're trying our best to ramp up the communication on this, is just how hard the Home Office are coming on this, right? And I think that is evidence really in the fact that raids are up 77%, and that is what they call them, raids. They don't call them visits. They very clear in their language. They're calling these raids because they very much see them as aggressive sort of visits, not, pop in for a quick chat and how you're getting on with your right to work documents. This is interviewing drivers and asking them questions around their status as someone who's providing services in the UK. And then to double down on that, arrests are up 83% as well, right? So, we're hearing across, the industry of drivers actually getting arrested or running away when the Home Office turn up from the depot because they know they don't have the right to work. And I think the bit that's